The autumn of 1887 painted London in shades of amber and gold, yet within the opulent drawing-room of Lord Pemberton's Mayfair mansion, Baron Edmund Ashworth felt nothing but the cold grip of ennui. At 27, he possessed everything a gentleman of his station could desire: a vast estate in the Cotswolds, a town-house that rivaled those of dukes, and a wife who would soon bear him an heir. Yet as he sat listening to Pemberton drone on about his latest business ventures, Edmund found himself wondering if this was all life had to offer a man of his breeding. "I say, Ashworth, you look positively morose," Pemberton observed, swirling his brandy. "Surely the prospect of fatherhood hasn't dampened your spirits entirely?" Edmund forced a smile, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Forgive me, old friend. My mind has been elsewhere of late." He was indeed a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a kind of aristocratic features that had been refined through generations of noble breeding. His black hair was perfectly groomed, his clothing impeccable, yet there was something restless in his manner that spoke of deeper dissatisfactions. "Perhaps what you need is a distraction," Pemberton suggested. "Speaking of which, I must commend my new maid. The girl has been absolutely remarkable, transformed the running of this household entirely." As if summoned by their conversation, the drawing-room door opened with barely a whisper. Edmund glanced up absently, expecting to see the usual elderly servant, but instead found himself transfixed by the young woman who entered with a tea service. She moved with unconscious grace, her slender figure modestly clothed in the regulation black dress and white apron of domestic service. Yet there was nothing servile in her bearing. Her auburn hair was neatly arranged beneath her cap, though rebellious curls escaped to frame a face of startling beauty. High cheekbones spoke of good breeding despite her station, and her green eyes held an intelligence that made Edmund's breath catch in his throat. "Ah, Rose," Pemberton said warmly. "Gentlemen, may I present Miss Rose Whitmore, late of Yorkshire. Rose, this is Baron Ashworth." Rose curtsied with perfect propriety, her eyes meeting Edmund's for just a moment before properly lowering her gaze. "My lord," she murmured, her voice carrying the soft lilt of the Yorkshire dales. Edmund found himself unable to speak, struck not merely by her beauty but by something indefinable in her presence. There was a dignity about her that transcended her station, a quiet strength that drew him like a moth to flame. "Rose came to me with the highest recommendations," Pemberton continued, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. "Her previous employer, Lady Thornfield, was devastated to lose her when she moved to Bath." "Indeed," Edmund managed, watching as Rose arranged the tea service with practiced efficiency. Her hands were small and graceful, unmarked by the harsh labor that typically marked those in service. "And what brings you to London, Miss Whitmore?" She looked up again, and this time held his gaze a moment longer. "Circumstances, my lord. Sometimes one must seek new opportunities when old ones are no longer suitable." There was something in her tone that suggested a story, depths Edmund found himself longing to explore. He was accustomed to being the center of attention wherever he went, yet this young woman seemed utterly unimpressed by his title or his obvious wealth. After she departed, Edmund found himself unable to concentrate on Pemberton's conversation. His mind kept returning to those intelligent green eyes and the way she had spoken to him, respectful yet unintimidated, as if she saw through the trappings of his position to something more essential beneath. "You seem quite taken with my Rose," Pemberton observed with amusement. "I must warn you, she's proven quite immune to the charms of my male guests. Several young gentlemen have tried their luck, only to be politely but firmly rebuffed." This information only intrigued Edmund further. He was unaccustomed to rejection, having found doors and hearts opened easily by his combination of wealth, title, and undeniable attractiveness. The idea of a challenge stirred something in him that had long lain dormant. When he returned to his own mansion that evening, Edmund found his wife, Lady Charlotte Ashworth, waiting in the morning-room despite the late hour. At 24, Charlotte was everything society deemed desirable in a baroness: blonde, pretty in a conventional way, well-bred, and now pleasingly round with their first child. Yet as he looked at her seated there in her silk evening gown, embroidering some infant's garment, Edmund felt only a hollow sense of duty. "How was your evening, darling?" Charlotte asked, setting down her needlework to smile at him. Her smile was as perfect as everything else about her, and just as predictable. "Pleasant enough," Edmund replied, moving to pour himself a whisky from the crystal decanter. Pemberton's new maid served tea. Quite competent. He didn't know why he mentioned Rose at all, only that he found himself unable to stop thinking about her. Charlotte nodded absently, already returning to her embroidery. "Mrs. Henderson has been complaining about the housemaids again," she said. "Perhaps we should consider hiring someone new to oversee them properly." The words were spoken innocently enough, but they planted a seed in Edmund's mind that grew with each passing hour. By morning, he had convinced himself that what his household truly needed was a more experienced maid to train the younger girls and assist Mrs. Henderson with the more demanding tasks. It was purely a matter of domestic efficiency, he told himself as he penned a note to Pemberton asking for Rose's particulars. Nothing more than a business arrangement. Yet even as he wrote the words, Edmund knew he was lying to himself. There had been something in Rose Whitmore's eyes that had awakened a hunger he hadn't even realized he possessed, a hunger for something real, something that challenged him, something that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't for years. 3 days later, Rose stood in the servants' hall of Ashworth Manor, listening as the housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, explained her duties. The manor was even grander than Lord Pemberton's London house, with soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, and enough rooms to house a small village. Yet for all its magnificence, Rose sensed an undercurrent of loneliness that permeated the very walls. "You'll be responsible for the morning rooms and the Baron's private study," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "His lordship is very particular about his papers. Nothing is to be moved or disturbed." Rose nodded, though her mind was only half on the housekeeper's instructions. She had been surprised when the Baron's offer arrived, particularly given its generous terms. The salary was nearly double what Lord Pemberton had paid, with a private room and better provisions than she had dared hope for. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of the way Baron Ashworth had looked at her during that brief encounter in the drawing-room. It wasn't the crude appraisal she was accustomed to from men of his class, but something more complex, intense and searching, as if he had been trying to read her very soul. "You'll take your meals with the other maids," Mrs. Henderson continued, "and you're expected to be properly dressed at all times. His lordship runs a respectable household." Rose had heard rumors about Baron Ashworth, whispers among the servants that he was demanding and arrogant, quick to dismiss those who displeased him. Yet she had also heard that he was fair to those who served him well, and that his household was one of the most sought-after positions among London's domestic staff. What the whispers didn't prepare her for was the man himself. When she encountered him that first afternoon, polishing the silver in his study while he worked at his massive mahogany desk, Rose felt the same electric tension she had experienced at Lord Pemberton's house. He was even more handsome than she remembered, his dark hair catching the light as he bent over his correspondence. There was an elegance to his movements, a casual confidence that spoke of a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will. Yet when he looked up and their eyes met, Rose saw something unexpected, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his reputation. "Miss Whitmore," he said, setting down his pen, "I trust Mrs. Henderson has made you comfortable?" "Yes, my lord." "Thank you." Rose continued her work, hyper-aware of his presence across the room. She had dealt with the attentions of wealthy men before, and had learned to navigate such situations with careful professionalism. "I was surprised you chose to leave Lord Pemberton's employ," Edmund continued, rising from his desk to move closer. "He spoke very highly of your service." Rose paused in her polishing, choosing her words carefully. "Lord Pemberton is a kind master, but the position here offered opportunities for advancement that I could not ignore. It wasn't entirely the truth. She had been perfectly content in Pemberton's household, but something about the Baron's offer had intrigued her. Perhaps it was the challenge in his dark eyes, or the sense that beneath his aristocratic reserve lay depths worth exploring. "And what do you hope to advance toward, Miss Whitmore?" Edmund asked, now standing close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something uniquely masculine. Rose met his gaze directly, a spark of defiance in her green eyes. "Independence, my lord. The means to determine my own future rather than having it determined for me." Edmund found himself smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in months. Most servants would have given him some humble platitude about being grateful for the opportunity to serve. Rose Whitmore, however, spoke of her ambitions with a frankness that was both refreshing and intoxicating. "An admirable goal," he said softly. "I hope you'll find your time here educational." There was something in his tone that made Rose's pulse quicken, though she maintained her composure. "I'm sure I will, my lord." Over the following weeks, Edmund found excuses to seek Rose out. He would request tea in his study at unusual hours, or ask her to dust shelves that had been cleaned just the day before. Each encounter was brief and seemingly innocent, yet charged with an undercurrent of attraction that neither could ignore. Rose, for her part, found herself anticipating these moments with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had never felt such a powerful draw to any man, let alone one so far above her station. Edmund Ashworth was everything she should avoid: married, titled, and possessed of the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having been refused anything he desired. Yet beneath that arrogance she sensed something else. In unguarded moments she caught glimpses of a loneliness that matched her own, a restlessness that suggested he too felt trapped by the expectations of his position. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked November afternoon. Rose was arranging flowers in the morning-room when Edmund appeared in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. "My lord?" she asked, concerned by his expression. "Is something amiss?" Edmund closed the door behind him, something he had never done before during their encounters. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Rose," he said, and her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "I find myself in an impossible situation." She set down the flowers, her heart racing. "My lord, you must know the effect you have on me," he continued, moving closer. "These past weeks have been a torment. I think of nothing but you, your voice, your smile, the way you challenge me with those remarkable eyes." Rose took a step back, though part of her longed to move closer. "Sir, you forget yourself. You are a married man, and I am in your employ. Do you think I haven't tortured myself with those very facts?" Edmund's voice was rough with emotion. "I have never felt this way about anyone, Rose. My marriage was arranged for convenience and bloodlines. There is no love there, no passion, no meeting of minds as I feel with you." The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and intoxicating. Rose knew she should leave, should remind him of his duties and her position. Instead, she found herself asking, "What are you suggesting, my lord?" Edmund stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I am suggesting that two people who feel as we do should not be denied happiness by the arbitrary rules of society." His hand reached out to cup her cheek, and Rose closed her eyes at the gentle touch. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with such tenderness, such reverence. When she opened her eyes again, she saw her own longing reflected in his dark gaze. "This is madness," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "Then let us be mad together," Edmund murmured, and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was everything Rose had imagined and more, tender yet passionate, demanding yet giving. She felt herself melting against him, her carefully maintained defenses crumbling at the first touch of his mouth on hers. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Rose," Edmund said her name like a prayer. "Tell me you feel this too. Tell me I'm not alone in this madness." She looked up at him, this powerful man who seemed so vulnerable in this moment, and knew she was lost. "You're not alone," she whispered. What followed was a courtship conducted in shadows and stolen moments. Edmund would find reasons to summon Rose to his study in the evenings, ostensibly to organize his papers or dust his books. Instead, they would talk for hours, about literature, politics, their dreams and disappointments. Rose discovered that beneath his aristocratic exterior, Edmund was intelligent and surprisingly progressive in his views. He, in turn, was fascinated by her quick wit and unconventional perspectives on the world. Their first kiss led to others, each more passionate than the last. Edmund was careful never to compromise her reputation among the other servants, but within the privacy of his study, they allowed themselves to explore the growing attraction between them. "You're different from other women of your class," Edmund told her one evening as they sat before the fire. Rose perched on the arm of his chair in a way that would have scandalized society. "How so?" she asked, enjoying the feel of his fingers playing with her hair. "You're not impressed by my title or my wealth," he said. "You see me as a man, not as a baron. Do you know how rare that is?" Rose turned to study his profile in the firelight. "Perhaps that's because I've learned not to judge people by their circumstances. Birth and breeding don't necessarily make one worthy of respect, actions do." It was conversations like these that made Edmund realize how intellectually starved he had been in his marriage to Charlotte. His wife was pleasant enough, but their discussions rarely moved beyond social gossip and household management. Rose challenged him, argued with him when she disagreed, and introduced him to ideas that had never occurred to him. Meanwhile, Charlotte grew larger with their child, her confinement preventing her from accompanying Edmund to social functions. This gave him even more freedom to pursue his forbidden relationship with Rose, though the guilt of his deception weighed heavily on his conscience. The affair began in earnest on a cold December night when Edmund found Rose in the library, reading by the light of a single candle. She had borrowed one of his books of poetry, something that surprised and delighted him. "Byron?" he asked, settling beside her on the leather sofa. "Scandalous, I know," Rose said with a small smile. "But I've always preferred poets who write about passion rather than propriety." Edmund took the book from her hands, finding the page she had been reading. "She walks in beauty, like the night," he quoted softly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Of cloudless climes and starry skies." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Rose felt her breath catch as Edmund reached out to trace the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. "So vibrant and alive. Being with you makes me remember who I was before society told me who I should be." This time, when he kissed her, Rose didn't pull away. She surrendered to the passion that had been building between them for weeks, allowing herself to forget, for one night, all the reasons why this was impossible. They made love there before the dying fire, with a tenderness and passion that neither had ever experienced. Edmund was gentle and patient, treating Rose with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. For her part, Rose gave herself completely, holding nothing back despite knowing the pain that surely lay ahead. Afterward, as they lay entwined before the embers, Rose traced patterns on Edmund's chest with her fingertip. "This cannot continue," she said quietly, though her heart broke at the words. Edmund caught her hand, pressing it flat against his heart. "Don't ask me to give you up, Rose. I cannot go back to the emptiness I felt before I knew you." "And what of your wife? Your child?" Rose asked, voicing the questions that had tormented them both. Edmund's jaw tightened. "Charlotte and I have an arrangement, nothing more. She will have her position as my baroness, and our child will have my name and inheritance. But my heart, My heart belongs to you." It was a seductive argument, and Rose wanted desperately to believe it could be so simple. Yet she knew the reality of their situation far better than Edmund seemed to. She was a servant in his household, completely dependent on his good will for her livelihood. If their affair were discovered, she would be ruined while he would face nothing more than social censure. Still, when Edmund begged her to meet him again the following night, Rose found herself unable to refuse. The connection between them was too strong, the passion too overwhelming to deny. Their affair settled into a pattern over the winter months. By day, Rose performed her duties with perfect professionalism, giving no hint of her relationship with the master of the house. By night, she would slip through the darkened corridors to Edmund's study, where they would lose themselves in each other's arms. Edmund had never known such happiness. Rose brought light and laughter to his previously ordered existence, challenging him intellectually while satisfying needs he hadn't even known he possessed. Their love-making was passionate and tender by turns, but it was their conversations afterward that truly bound them together. "If things were different," he told her one night as they lay together, "if I had met you before my marriage was arranged." "But you didn't," Rose said gently, though her heart ached at the wistful tone in his voice. "And we cannot change what is, only decide how to live with it." Spring brought new complications. Charlotte's pregnancy advanced, and she grew more demanding of Edmund's attention. Social obligations increased as the London season approached, limiting the time he could spend with Rose. Most troubling of all, Rose began to notice the other servants watching her with suspicion. "They know," she told Edmund one evening as he held her in their favorite spot before the fire. "Mrs. Henderson has been asking pointed questions about my duties, and the other maids whisper when they think I can't hear them." Edmund's arms tightened around her. "Let them whisper. They can prove nothing." But Rose knew better. Servants' quarters were hotbeds of gossip, and it would take little to destroy her reputation. She had seen other maids dismissed for far less than what she was actually guilty of. The crisis came in May, just as Charlotte entered her final month of confinement. Rose was summoned to Mrs. Henderson's office, where the older woman sat with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. "Miss Whitmore," the housekeeper began, "it has come to my attention that you have been taking liberties with your position in this household." Rose kept her expression carefully neutral. "I'm not certain what you mean, Mrs. Henderson." "Don't play coy with me, girl. I've been managing this household for 30 years, and I know when a maid is getting ideas above her station." Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "His lordship may be charmed by a pretty face now, but men of his class always return to their own kind in the end. You would do well to remember that." The words stung because Rose feared they might be true. Yet she held her head high as she replied, "I have performed my duties to the best of my ability, Mrs. Henderson. If you have specific complaints about my work, I would be happy to address them." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Your work is adequate, Miss Whitmore. It's your conduct that concerns me. I suggest you remember your place before others begin to notice your familiarity with his lordship." That evening, Rose waited in vain for Edmund to summon her to his study. When she finally ventured to seek him out, she found him in his library with a brandy, staring moodily into the fire. "Edmund," she said softly, using his given name for the first time outside of their most intimate moments. He looked up, and Rose saw strain and guilt written across his features. "Rose, you shouldn't be here. If Charlotte needed something and found you—" "She's been abed for weeks," Rose said, moving closer despite his words. "What's troubling you?" Edmund set down his glass and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Everything," he said into her hair. "This deception, these lies. I never intended for it to become so complicated." Rose pulled back to look at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps we've been foolish to think this could continue indefinitely. Edmund's voice was heavy with regret. "You were right weeks ago when you said this couldn't go on. I was selfish to ask you to ignore the impossible nature of our situation." The words hit Rose like physical blows. She had expected this day to come, had tried to prepare herself for it, yet hearing Edmund speak of ending their relationship felt like death. "I see," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "And have you given thought to what becomes of me now?" Edmund winced at the quiet dignity in her tone. "Of course. I've arranged a position for you with my cousin in Scotland. Lord Mackenzie is a good man, and he's agreed to take you on as head housemaid with excellent references. The salary is generous, and you'll have your own cottage on the estate." Rose stared at him, seeing for the first time the casual assumption of privilege that allowed him to arrange her life without consulting her wishes. "How efficient of you," she said coolly. "When am I to depart?" "Rose, please don't be like this," Edmund pleaded, reaching for her hand. "You must know how difficult this is for me as well." She pulled away from his touch. "Difficult? You return to your wife and your heir, your title and your estates. I am the one who must begin again with nothing but what you choose to give me." The truth of her words left Edmund speechless. He had been thinking only of the pain of losing her, not of the practical realities she would face. In his world, problems could be solved with money and influence. In hers, a woman's reputation was all she had. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. Rose looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face. "No," she said finally. "I don't believe you did. But you never considered the cost of this affair for anyone but yourself." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll be gone by morning, my lord. There's no need for Scotland. I have friends who will take me in until I can make other arrangements." "Rose, wait." But she was already gone, leaving Edmund alone with his guilt and the hollow echo of his own privilege. Rose packed her few belongings in the small hours of the morning, her movements mechanical as her heart shattered. She had known this day would come, yet she had allowed herself to hope that somehow love might triumph over the rigid structures of their society. As she prepared to leave Ashworth Manor forever, Rose reflected on the lessons she had learned. Edmund Ashworth was not a cruel man, but he was a product of his class, accustomed to taking what he wanted without fully considering the consequences for others. Their affair had been a delicious dream, but dreams, she now understood, were luxuries she could not afford. She left a brief note for Mrs. Henderson, tendering her resignation due to a family emergency. It was a lie, but a necessary one that would protect both her reputation and Edmund's. Then she slipped out into the gray dawn, carrying nothing but her carpet-bag and the bittersweet memories of a love that had been doomed from the start. Edmund found the note on his desk that evening, along with a small volume of poetry she had left behind, the same book of Byron they had been reading the night their affair began. Inside the front cover she had written a single line: "She walks in beauty, like the night, and leaves like morning, swift and bright." He never saw Rose Whitmore again, though he made discreet inquiries through the years. She had vanished into the vastness of London's working class, leaving him to wonder what had become of the woman who had shown him, however briefly, what it meant to love without reservation. Charlotte bore him a son that summer, a healthy boy who would carry on the Ashworth name. Edmund performed his duties as husband and father with the same efficiency he applied to managing his estates, but part of him remained forever changed by those stolen months with Rose. In quiet moments, usually late at night in his study, Edmund would think of green eyes and auburn hair, of passionate conversations and tender caresses. He would wonder if Rose had found the independence she had sought, if she had married and found happiness with someone who could offer her more than stolen moments in the shadows. As for Rose herself, she built a new life far from the grand houses and drawing-rooms where she had learned the true cost of loving above one's station. She never married, though she had suitors, preferring the safety of emotional distance to the vulnerability love required. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would allow herself to remember a dark-eyed baron who had made her feel, for a brief season, like the heroine of one of the romantic novels she secretly devoured. She would remember the way he had said her name, the reverence in his touch, the conversations that had made her feel seen and valued for who she truly was. But she never regretted leaving. Love, Rose had learned, was not enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds. Society's rules were not mere conventions to be flouted by passion. They were iron bars that trapped the unwary. She had been fortunate to escape with her reputation intact and her heart merely broken, rather than shattered beyond repair. The years passed, and both Edmund and Rose aged gracefully in their separate worlds. He became a respected member of Parliament, known for his surprisingly progressive views on workers' rights and social reform. She established herself as a dressmaker to middle-class ladies, finding satisfaction in creating beauty and building financial independence through her own efforts. Neither forgot the other, though neither sought a reunion. Their love had been real but impossible, passionate but ultimately destructive. It remained a bittersweet chapter in both their lives, a reminder of what might have been in a world where birth mattered less than the meeting of two hearts that recognized their perfect match too late to change their circumstances. In the end, their story was not one of triumph over social barriers, but of the painful wisdom that comes from understanding when love alone is not enough to overcome the weight of duty, expectation, and the rigid hierarchies that govern human society. It was a very Victorian tragedy indeed, beautiful in its passion, heartbreaking in its impossibility, and ultimately redemptive in the growth it brought to two souls who learned to love deeply, if not wisely, in the shadows of a world that would never allow their union to see the light of day.